Okay, welcome from Copenhagen. Thank you for joining this workshop today. I see many participants joining from different countries, and in this workshop, I will walk you through a model to quantify compliance risks. When I was preparing this model, I focused on helping risk managers, but also I wanted to help compliance officers, legal advisors, privacy specialists, business consultants, internal auditors. And in this session, I put my 22 experience in assessing and treating compliance risks as other practices from great colleagues in this area. I am very, very excited about bringing these ideas that I think that is going to be very helpful for you. So let's start with the what, then let's go to the why, and finally, let's go on the how of assessing compliance risk. But let me share my screen and do the magic if I am able to select the right screen. So I think that we are here. Quantifying compliance and legal risk zero from zero to hero. So what is a compliance risk? We can follow the new ISO on compliance management system that we define compliance risks as the uncertainty in meeting internal and external obligations. In other words, we can say that it's the probability and the consequence of reaching compliance obligations. Customer and the general public expectations are also included as an obligation here. Managing compliance risk is key for the profitability, but also the sustainability of organization, and there is a lot of attention in this area. So when we include voluntary commitments and ethical values to conduct business, we extend the compliance risks to what we call the integrity risk or ethical risks. In other words, all the common requirements that most of our organizations need to comply as part of this type of risk, this family, this domain of risk, are corruption, privacy, anti-money laundering, insider trading, restricted transactions, concessions and contracts, very important in public services, very important in many organizations, how we assess contractual risks in order to get the right pricing. Labor, health, safety, environmental, also for operations are extremely important. And also intellectual property. These are the common examples of compliance risks. And we also include here the risk of breaching the company policies, processes, and controls when in practice, employees and third parties need to comply with these requirements. So many requirements here, many obligations here is a whole universe of internal and external obligations. And also, part of the compliance risks are the legal risks that we can define then also the uncertainty in meeting legal obligations as a subset of the compliance risks. In this particular area, we cover regulations, laws, and statutory requirements that govern all the organization. Of course, they change dramatically from one country to the other, from one service, one product to the other. And also, we need to add here the contractual obligations and the agreement, the service level agreements, all the requirements that they are now engaging in legal terms, the organization. We have two ISOs addressing these risks and supporting, at the end of the day, the ISO 31000 on risk management. These new ISOs are the one on the compliance management system, the ISO 27301, that is very recent. And also we have an ISO on the management of legal risks that is part also of the family of the 31000, that is the 31022 that is coming from last year. So that is the what. But let me just explain something very important here about compliance. In compliance, there are risks that we cannot accept. Nothing new in risk management. These non-go decisions are very important, but here, because we have obligation with laws and regulations and ethical requirements, we cannot afford to breach them. The law and ethical commitments to prevent fraud and corruptions are setting the limits for decision-making when we are deciding. For instance, you can, if you don't invest in actively complying with the law, you will decide that you don't want to operate in a market or offer a service or get this contract or this third party. You don't just say, I don't want to buy personal protection equipment for workers because the risk of fines here with labor law are low. This is not what you do. I mean, you are required to get the right protection to the workers by law, and this is something that you are not compromising in your decision-making. Of course, then in the operation, they may be the risk if the controls are not there, if the training is not there, if you are not having a supervisor ensuring that the employees are using the protection equipment, they will be the risk of a breach, but you are not deciding firsthand to breach that requirement. Also, about bribing, you don't bribe a public officer because the risk of having anti-corruption law, a claim in the anti-corruption law is low. No, you just follow the business and you know that you are committed to the client and not to the public officer. However, in practice, the conditions in contracts requires managing the risk of non-compliance, the liabilities. We need to calculate price. We need to negotiate clauses. We need companies to define the budget to prioritize and invest in compliance controls and training. So, the why. Why do you need to comply with why do you need to quantify compliance risks? First is to assess the compliance risk in the key decision-making processes to embed the quantitative techniques. The main reason here is that you need to demonstrate the due care to address instances of incompetence and negligence. That is what we call corporate defense, that you are able to justify your decision-making. You need to show the right level of controls in order to prevent harms to clients, in order to prevent breaches to the law. And here there are plenty of requirements that they are extremely important. Criminal law, for instance, criminal law for organizations, and privacy. They are based on the accountability principles that you need to implement some controls to reduce the chances for the organization to commit a criminal offense. For instance, to bribe a public officer or to have some fraud or to lose control or a piece of personal data of your customers. So there is a lot of attention in which you need to justify what you're controlling, and most important, what you are not controlling in terms of compliance, whether you want to invest. So in terms of evaluating the compliance programs in investigation when there is a breach, for instance, related to corruption, any prosecutor will collect evidence on how the organization have identified, assessed, and defined its risk profile and the methodology that the company used to address a particular compliance requirement that it faced. And they want to know. And you cannot reply to a prosecutor that some managers in a room with a wet finger in the air decided that that process, that service, that country, that operation was a green risk and nothing should be done. There is not any way that you can support the decision-making if there is a case in which somebody, a prosecutor, is evaluating your compliance program because there is an investigation, because there was a breach. So this area is extremely, extremely important in order to defend your organization. Then, you need to start from what is not perfect to continue a journey to improve your models to quantify the compliance risk. Things are not perfect, and you need to start helping the business, helping the legal advisors, helping the consultants that they are dealing with, for instance, privacy or controls or the auditors, in start talking about a data-driven risk assessment based on quantified goals for the operations and the requirement that we need to set. So here, a risk quantification on a contract is much better than non-risk quantification. Even when you are starting with limitations, it's going to be better than nothing. And also, in this area, we have plenty of colleagues that they are not used to our models. There are plenty of very immature practices, which have a good opportunity for us as a risk manager. There are plenty of low-hanging fruits that can be easily achieved by setting tasks, by setting a big model to define, for instance, major risks related to this concession. And then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper to understand the root cause and the consequences of breaching a particular clause or a particular recital or a particular article of a regulation. So this presentation is about a journey from zero to hero. And it requires you as a risk manager to plan for the steps, starting from the most important decisions in compliance. For instance, when there is a large contract, a major client, a major operation that we want to deal with, is a bid in the concession. That is the process that you want to embed decision-making with the tool that they are using. You don't need to create an extra layer of analysis here, because when they were crafting the contract, when they were modeling the price for the contract, that when they were designing the service, designing the process, they already used tools. And you can add the tools to assess the assumptions in terms of compliance. So which is the requirement and what will be the consequence and the chance if we are not meeting the requirement based on different scenarios. Nothing new here. This is what we are evolving in risk management. So basically, you need to have this energy in order to start helping your organization to mature in the practice. So start collecting the data from the internal sources that here in compliance means losses about compensations, penalties, fines, complaints, reports coming from the whistleblowing line, disputes, claims. There are plenty of statistics here. Also, measure fraud, measure disputes with the clients and the vendors and the suppliers. Incidents and near misses are key. Start measuring them. You need to have a database of fraud that occur in the organization, for instance, to extrapolate that data. Also, you got plenty of legal contingency already booked in the accounting system. You got plenty of data here because it has to be recognized and followed. We follow all the legal procedures, all the laws, claims, the legal claims, sorry, and the cases that the legal department is following. Go ahead and look for these contingencies. Also, in terms of the human factors, you got cultural surveys. How well ethics and decision-making and training and SOPs and policies are understood by the employees. And you also have plenty of audits in this area, inspection, labor inspections, quality inspections, plenty of certifications that they are collecting non-compliances. So look for the non-compliances. They should be valued. They should have a priority in this report. They do that work. They sort the findings, the observation, the non-compliance in a way that you can easily start getting internal sources for this analysis. And then also in this journey, you need to start considering external sources of data in compliance. They may be legal databases that you can consult. How much were the fines for privacy regulations in Europe? You got this information, it's free. Country by country, article by article, this measure after these type of regulations being in place for years, this information is collected. There are industry reports. In the banking sector, for instance, all the operational risks are reported and shared. And you can also look for non-compliances by competitors or in a country, which are the hot topics, how the enforcement is evolving. So there are plenty of data sources here that you need to start incorporating, validating, ensure the quality of the data that you are feeding your model, and then finally being able to improve your decision making. And then for this particular type of risk, you need to sell a story and not numbers, which means that for the background of the stakeholders in this area, you can better explain how you can negotiate the contract clauses to have the provisions and the reserves, reserve for penalties and liabilities. You can also help them to calculate the right level of pricing in concession bids, contracts. You can help them to invest in compliance, privacy, anti-fraud, and corruption risks and controls, which is the level of control that you need to invest to be exposed to that obligation if you want to launch this service or this product or to open a branch in Venezuela. Well, this is the way to go. Also, here, there is a lot of risk financing. You can define your insurance coverage and the warranties that they are behind. You can also help which is the best strategy to dispute administrative or any legal argument. There are decision trees. For instance, you can say, okay, I would like to litigate in that way or in the other way. And then you can say, no, I say, no, go in this due diligence or don't go in due diligence. But remember, in this area, it's very important that you keep in mind that you need to sell stories. You need to sell this decision-making because usually the people in the business are just seeing the output and they are not used to our quantitative techniques. but they understand the story behind that. This is my personal advice here, the why you need to evolve and understand the compliance risks. So, in general, you need to measure the risk of non-compliance in the contractual clauses. You need to start from the contractual requirements, clause by clause, and assess that the compliance and legal assumptions that you are thinking is going to happen when you are deciding to sign this contract, to offer that contract in a service, when they create a business plan that is based for that contract, can be tested. You need to test your assumption, the volatility of the assumptions. You also need to prevent the contractual default by third parties, by the right level of penalties and provisions. Now with COVID, this area had became very, very important. So contractual default. Are we following out that our third party have the capability to address those risks, particularly the solvency risks? After the COVID crisis. So there are a lot of this very hot topic here. You need to calculate the budget of the ethics and compliance program. How much do you want to invest? So you can start from criminal offense, fraud, corruption, tax, insider trading, and legal requirements, which are the topics, the requirements, the laws, the regulations that the company needs to be focused. You cannot deploy the same level of control into all the obligations. You need to get a priority in order to invest. So you can start from those requirements. There is a compliance register, or there should be a compliance register with all the list of requirements that the organization needs to observe, and it should be there. And then you can measure. In this program, you were targeting to deal with this level of complaints, liabilities, claims, compensations, reported cases, whatever that is part of the compliance key performance indicators. Good. Start measuring whether they are not being met. And then you can also deal with the analysis in terms of privacy. How do you protect personal data? Extremely important. You cannot encrypt the whole thing. You cannot anonymize all databases. You cannot deal with the same level of cybersecurity control for all pieces of information in transit or at rest. In order to get this priority, these tools are extremely important. So now let's go to the tools, the how, finally. Well, there are 3 tools that I wanted to recommend. First, decision trees. Nothing new here. I am not going to cover that thing in the model, but basically, you can start measuring the different scenarios when you are deciding, for instance, different alternatives with the expected output. This is very common in compliance, but this is very common in legal. That is a nice initial approach. I am also using Monte-Carlo simulations, and the model that I want to show today in the demo is based on the Monte-Carlo simulations. And when there is no data that we can use, because some of the decisions here are about new products, there is a new regulation, a new emerging piece of regulation affecting the business, you can use calibrated estimates. That is also very useful in terms of compliance. How to show that? Well, if you are expecting me to say heat maps in this forum is not gonna fly. So basically, what I found very important is using histograms that you can see the different outputs to set a compliance reserve, and also in the same line, loss exceedance curves. Those are the visualization tools that can provide, in my view, the best results. And then remember that you have first and second tier losses of the compliance breaches. You need to consider a calculation for setting penalties and indemnizations, fine and sanctions, and legal and remediation costs. Always, 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 you're going to have immediate consequence of the non-compliance, and they are very easily calculated because they are set in a contract, in a law, in a regulation. So basically, you got a level of certainty here about what you are assessing. Frequency here is more challenging because it depends on your controls and the exposition to different threats that they are finally impacting compliance. There are plenty of operational issues here, materialized operational risks that they have compliance as a second tier impact. But always have a methodology and start from the beginning, the immediate result, impact. Then also consider the second tier losses, the indirect losses, or the ones that they can be not so immediate. For instance, loss of customers. So multiply the number of customers that you think that they're going to fly because there is a non-compliance here, and just deduct the actual profitability of these customers. And also you can use the depreciation of the marketing budget. So people in communication are very, very, very aware of how much it takes to gain a client. So if you are able to understand or to foresee how many clients will decline a service, and then you can see how much of the marketing investment was lost because there is a scandal, a reputation issue, you are not meeting the expectations, the contracts are broken, and they finally think that they are much better off with your competitors. Well, and also, if there are many non-compliances, you may lose the licenses. And also the final impact is coming from a decrease in the capitalization market and the stock price. Externally visible non-compliances, for instance, scandals, will have an impact on your stock price. So have a way that you are calculating the impact with all this scope. And then the tool that I'm going to show in the model is based on the log normal distribution with a long tail. I recommend this approach because the compliance risks, when we look at the studies, when we look at how, for instance, the reputational impact is shown in the social media, for instance, or the stock prices, that we have a long tail of high cases that also we need to assess. And of course, in this approach, you need to assess your confidence interval. Different losses will have a minimum and a maximum that you may not be sure. So when you are not sure about these intervals, you can think that there is an error, that some cases will be lower than the minimum that you are setting, and they may be higher than the maximum. Also in compliance, there are plenty of cases that you got a cap. You have a maximum amount, and it's also part of my model. Formula, nothing new here. The confidence level that you are setting, it's moved to the standard error. And then you have a formula. I wrote it down in as an Excel formula that I think helps in order to copy and paste this, this formula. In my previous workshop in the Risk Awareness Week, I gave a tool in order to understand how Monte Carlo was working with a very simple case, very simplified, just to understand how the Monte Carlo scenarios were built. And here is the natural evolution of that initial approach, in which you can have a formula that you can copy and paste and use to your models, as long as you are talking about a log normal distribution, that they can be used for impacts and probabilities. So let's go to the model, and I hope that you are now able to see my Excel with the model that I'm gonna distribute as a link in the session. When you go to the site for the Risk Awareness Week, you got the details about the different workshops, and you can find the link to this model to download, play, vandalize, really test this model, and I am more than welcome to support any thought and any improvement, any idea, any evolution of this model. So let's start with a very easy business case. I am not covering a particular piece of regulation, but they are based on an actual regulation. But I don't want to talk about whether this regulation is important in Europe or in New York. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a case that I want you to know. Let's say that there is a code for housing, and if there is a safety breach with water, fire, whatever, you get a similar penalty, a civil penalty, sorry, with a minimum and a maximum amount for lead violations. The minimum is 1,000 and the maximum is 3,000. This is a piece of actual regulation. Let's go to the model. Let's see. So basically, in this template, you can add the requirement here, and let's say you can say housing code, or you can start writing the risk perimeter of the statement, saying that fines may be due, and then you add the regulation, or you can say, because the maintenance may fail in meeting the requirement, the building A, B, C, and D may be exposed to fire, the threat, which may create a fine and any scenario. So you can write the requirement as you want in order to get the right statement. My advice is that cover all the perimeter of the risk in the statement to be very clear when you are communicating how these calculations are being done and what you're covering and what you are not covering. And then you can say, for your approach, there is a 80%, 90%, 95% of assurance, of confidence, that the impact will be between this and that value. You can always add uncertainties also in the risk statements. So let's say we say that the maximum loss will be 3,000 and the minimum will be 1,000. And then you may multiply because they say by offense. Let's say that there are several units, and this is the fine and for the violation per unit. It depends on the scenarios. Now we want to say that there is only one unit being involved, one violation, and that's all. And in the model, you can select the confidence level. You say that you are very sure that this is going to be the case. And then there is not any cap. There is not any cap to be the highest possible loss or the lowest. And then you have a probability per year. The maximum probability per year, let's say that you are facing this scenario to happen once per 10 years as the most probable scenario. That is the frequency. So you should have data about the previous non-compliances with this particular code. Let's say that that is the case, and you can say that it's 10%. And then what will be the minimum? So maybe you are expecting to have one fine each 20 years. So each year you are having 5%. And then automatically, the tool, the model, will create a histogram without any add-on, without any calculation, without any visual basic for application coding, nothing. It's just this formula that is the natural evolution of my previous session last year. So usually in practice, we are less confident when we are setting the probability than the impact in compliance. So let's say that we are 80% sure. And then finally, you have the median, the average, and of course that because we say that it's a long tail, the average is higher than the median. And then you have the bins, the different thresholds for this scenario to happen, and you can set how much is going to be the reserve if you want to cover per year 80% of the scenarios. You can also say, I want to have a reserve for non-compliance that is covering 90%. I want to be insured in that way. You can also talk about the previous and the cost with insurance or without an insurance. You can play with this formula as long as you want. Let me show you the magic here. So basically, this model, it's calculating with the formula that I shared to you, 10,000 scenarios. So basically, in this scenario, this risk was randomly producing a loss here of 1,546 euros, dollars, Swiss francs, Danish crowns, doesn't matter. And then you have also a probability. Because we are not so optimistic, we think that there is a long tail of events, so they're going to be also 1% of the scenarios that they're going to be higher than 3,000 and lower than 1,000. Or here, we think that there are 20% of the scenarios that they are lower than 5% and higher than 10%. For instance, let me look for a case that it will be this one, for instance. This is a case that we were very lucky because there were only 4% of occurrence this year for this risk. And we were more or less not lucky with the impact. So Monte-Carlo will play with these different scenarios that you sometimes may have. They may be luckier or not. and randomly we'll set the different thresholds. So copyright, you get here that there are some penalties with a huge deviation for each work that you are not complying with the copyright law. Good. And then you also need to add attorney's fee and card cost. Good. How do you do that? Now things are becoming more complicated. Further, you need to check whether they are relevant for you. Is 200 too low? Look at the data for companies that they have your type of copyright information and patents. Look for the size, the countries that you are dealing with and the complexity, and then you can find your own calculation. Then you also need to have a number of works. For your most common scenario, that is jeopardizing your compliance goals. This is the thing, your compliance goals. For your organization, breaching one work is going to be something to assess or not, because maybe one work for a large organization makes not any change. It's not affecting any goal. However, for a small organization, just one breach may be the difference between sustainability and bankruptcy. So you need to check, think, estimate which is the number of work, which is the number of fees that you are expecting. There are some maximum also a number of fees, and how much are the costs. And then you can think that for the number of scenarios, for instance, the maximum, you say that you believe you are a large organization, that there are 10 works, and then there are, let's say, 500,000 here as the most common scenario in this case, and then you will have maybe 40 million as the, sorry, it has to be lower, otherwise I'm gonna get let's check how the model is working. It's telling me that the minimum amount cannot be higher. So let's say that is 5 million. And you are not so sure about the impacts because there are extra costs. The more lines that you are adding into the impact, the confidence range will be decreased. And then let's say that you have also 10% of probabilities to happen next year and 5% in the most common scenario. And then you got the different calculation for the runs, the scenarios, and then we can collapse, group all the internal calculations, and then you have your own distribution, and you know how much do you need to set apart a year if you want to set a reserve. Let's say that you want to be covered by 95% of the cases, so it's going to be higher, or you want to be in the 50%, so it's going to be lower, the reserve, of course, per year. And then you can tell, okay, my horizon for the risk assessment is 10 years because I am assessing the breaches for the next 10 years. Then let me just cover the last two cases. Privacy regulations. You also have some cases, but then you have a maximum and a minimum amount. When you get a gap here in this model, you can use these values. Let's say that now, I look at what I am doing. The model will add all the compliance risk that I am using, that I am populating the model. So let's say that I have 1.5 million as a maximum amount. So definitely it's going to be much lower, and you can see here that there are nothing more. And so you got some caps. That also can be calculated for more complex requirements. For instance, when we are dealing with contractual clauses, some of the penalties are hard to calculate. So in this case, each invoice that you are not submitting after 2 months of the deadline, there should be a penalty of 5% of the value of the invoice that you are delaying. And also there is a minimum amount of the penalty, to 30% of the amount. So now you need to add like different lines in the calculation, and you use exactly the same formula to calculate a most probable scenario, best worst scenario, using PERT if you want, or basically start using the same formula for the whole analysis for each line. Use this tool, test this tool. It's everything is unlocked, everything is shown, everything is there for you to check the calculations and to check that the model is working. Enjoy this model. Let me come back to the presentation here. And I am happy to connect with you in Twitter, Skype, if you need to talk to me, or connect on LinkedIn. I am very thankful to Alexei and all these activities coming from what we are doing in terms of getting a community of quantitative risk managers, which is very promising in order to improve decision making. And it's a pleasure to be here in this workshop today. It's also a pleasure for me to help you in evolving with these ideas and using a better modeling for decision making. I am very focused on operational risks, and I am happy to connect from Denmark. Thank you so much, and see you next time.